Coming up next is a keynote address on reimagining urban infra for future cities by Ms. D. Thara, Additional Secretary, A. LNE, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. Over to you, Ms. Thara.
Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to be here in the Urban Innovation Summit. I think today, if any area requires a lot of innovation and relook, it is the urban area which needs a lot of innovation and energy from creative people to bring in really creative, efficient solutions. Now, innovation, why do you need innovation? Urban areas are, what is that urban areas have in special compared to rural areas? See, rural has been the backbone of economy for a long time in terms of agriculture, providing the natural resources and sustaining communities. What is urban area doing? Urban area is the area now which is sustaining a lot of livelihoods. Simply because of the density of population and the activities which are taking place and interactions taking place between the people. What are cities? They are essentially labor markets. And they are looking at actually how each of this stakeholder in the city is interacting with each other and producing some domestic product, and productivity is increasing, and this yields to economy. And this is how the cities are sustaining each other. And to bring in manufacturing activity, which is supported by service sector, which is also bringing in employment for a lot of people. Now, if everybody understands what are cities are nothing but they are nodes. They have nodes of production. And these nodes of production are supported by services. So this is the complex interaction of these things which make a city. The moment you take away the prime mover, the economic activity, the cities will go dead and now. Therefore, the first intervention of innovation is to be in the area of sustaining that economic activity or promoting that economic activity. Now, if we look at our cities, many times our governance infrastructure should ensure that the economic activity is sustained. At the same time, it is married with the sustainable development goals. Somewhere, this needs to be balanced. Both the environment and the economic activity needs to be balanced. Now, that is where a lot of innovations are required. How do we do that? First of all, we need to actually bring in that awareness that this is without the economic activity, city will not sustain or even be existing. So you just ensure that what are the things which sustain a city, which are the economic activities, and then look at what are the inefficiencies in it. And then bring in the moves or governance moves or the common society moves to ensure that these inefficiencies are taken away. And when I'm talking about inefficiencies, I'm not talking about profit. I'm also talking about how a polluting stream of effluent can get into a freshwater stream and pollute it, therefore making the whole thing unsustainable. So we need to look into what is this economic activity doing and how do you minimize the damage this economic activity is causing to the environment. At the same time, how do you convert that part, that is even ensuring that pollution doesn't happen, into an economic activity? See, therefore, it becomes a social entrepreneurship and environmental entrepreneurship, which should be married with economic entrepreneurship. And that is a very important innovation which should happen right away in cities. And many cities have started that to a certain extent. Number two, unfortunately, we do have a situation where a lot of economic activity has happened in the core of the city, and that is why the city had a core where all the trading, all the economic activities used to take place. Now, those are the areas which have become the most dense, unsustainable, most difficult for infrastructure. Can we relook at them? Can we preserve them as heritage and bring in value of the same activity has yielded a particular format? And many cities of India have formats of 100 years old, 200 years old. Now, in other countries, these 100-year, 200-year-old formats are like treasures. They use it very well. In fact, they create or complement the other areas of the city similarly to bring in that feel of heritage. So some of these 5 square kilometer areas within our cities, which are very dense, very core, but are known for very good food or good trading or good retailing, can we look at it very closely and retrofit and bring a lot more people to that place as an activity, as an enjoyable activity? So that is another way of rejuvenation, remaking the spaces, and also preserving this heritage by providing a little bit of money, not in terms of cash, but in terms of tradable development rights, which the people can use in other places of the city to develop their infrastructure, built up area, or real estate. So the developers will invest money in that area to bring that area up, not to modify that area, but to retain that area in the same form to the owners. If I have a house which is 100 years old and it's a living heritage, or 150 years old, if I am given 50% of my money FSI, as which I can trade in the market, and if the overall master planning provides for increased FSI in this thing, then we can bring in a lot of issues which will be bring in a lot of innovations which can sustain. So we have to look at the format of the cities. What do we want to retain and what do we want to modify? And if at all we want to modify, how do we modify? Again, modification should also be weighed in terms of overall social returns and social benefits rather than just money or economic returns. So this is a place where a lot of innovation can take place in terms of master planning, looking at area. Master planning means people think your whole city has to be planned. No, you can take an area and then plan it in such a manner and slowly change the area within that and then go for other areas. There you will invest less. You cannot change a whole city, but you can invest later and slowly that spin-off will work. And very important thing in cities is many people don't understand is city itself is a wealth creator. City doesn't need wealth from outside. It is a wealth creator. There are a lot of people in the city, middle class, lower middle class, who are willing to invest for a small shelter, but they don't get it. And how do you think about it? Transit-oriented development. Many people talk about transit-oriented development, but transit-oriented development means where there is public transit, next to it is very high-density development so that people don't use cars. And they just cars or personal vehicles to move around and they get into the bus. Now, the biggest problem is the amount of public transit we provide in city itself is very, very minimal. Or sometimes it is just about meeting 60% of the requirement, as in the case of Delhi, maybe 60% or 60 to 70%. How do you bring in once, at least in cities where the public transit is very reliable and robust, in big cities, metropolis, where the public transit is a nerve center, moving nerve center of the city, we can bring in transit-oriented development. That needs a little bit innovation of how do we actually look at the bylaws and enable people to come up with a very interesting formats when they, if you allow them to say, for example, affordable housing can come in there and you give some incentives. Like if you had to construct a high-end commercial space, you may be asking for extra charges. But if you are going to do affordable housing, you don't need to pay those charges to the government, and government can come in, or the municipal corporation can come in, or municipality can come in and provide that comfort. Another thing is, if you look at cities, a lot of land is lying with the government. When I say government, all the government agencies, there will be some agricultural department lands, there will be some technical department lands, there will be some these lands. I think these lands are going to take it to a level. These lands have to be looked at as wealth of the city. How do you plan these lands? Either you create a green lung in this, or you don't. If you're monetizing, then monetize it for affordable housing so that the working class comes into it. Because today you have to sustain working class spaces. Placemaking, you may have small houses, but if you have beautiful public places, that takes away a lot of stress of the living in small houses. We cannot provide huge houses to everybody, but we can always provide a beautiful world-class public place or a park to every citizen. And that should be accessible within 5 or 10 minutes. It could be a small urban forest. It should be accessible and it should be sustainable. So again, bringing in open spaces around a densely populated affordable housing stock is very important to bring in that whole, harmonious living. And then the most important thing is, why do you need service? Like, why do you need to travel? In fact, I would say one angle is to promote public transit, but the other angle is to say that how do you prevent travel? For example, can the house and the school get linked. In US, we have systems. I think Delhi also has such systems. I'm sure other places also should be. That a particular, the reason is today one school provides very good education, the other school doesn't provide very good education. So people look for educational institutions which provide excellent education. But see, that is one section of the society. But most of the society wants education, which is reasonably good. So the aspirations of those people have to be met through reform in the education, primary education and secondary education in the schools, both government and private. Private, people think that private does a lot of good things. Yes, private does, but not all of the schools. Can we bring in, and with technology we can do that. There's no need. Like for example, the most important thing is teachers' capacity building. Earlier, it used to be so difficult. Today, you can give a small video of a particular robot and that can teach about robotics. It is very difficult to keep up with all the knowledge, however intelligent a teacher may be. The teacher has to have emotional intelligence to co-opt the student into knowledge sharing, which the teacher can also have knowledge sharing with the kind of new technology we have. So I think education, health, and water and air and housing, if we all the five are combined in such a manner, and market, a small trend, if they could be combined, so each of the area should be self-sustainable in itself, and that will reduce travel. So reduction of travel, promoting affordable housing around the public transit with play of policies, that needs a lot of innovation. Creating world-class public spaces which are totally accessible even to the poorest of the poor. Creating health and infrastructure accessibility in your own house through technology. I mean, education, why you need to go to school? You need to develop social skills. For studying about a particular thing, now today you don't need to go to school. You can get it on your smartphone or a small phone, a feature phone, a small video on your laptop or on TV or anywhere. I mean, you can use, another thing is satellite channels are available. You can use satellite channels for pushing this information, which are available with the states to pushing this information. So the child can study whenever he wants from that channel, which is again a channel for education, but it's his own teacher teaching it. So we have to match the features. There is a lot of innovation required to match the features of school and health education, health sector, which is traditional, into the new technology mode so that they get it. So again, so you reduce the travel, you provide housing stock, as I told you, you play around, you find out what are the 5 things, USPs of my city, and strengthen them. In Delhi, Chandni Chowk area, still it needs you can do a lot more with that area. You can do a lot more with that area, and already a lot of work is happening. Similarly, in Kashi, there it is the Ganges and the area around the Ganges, which is the USP of that city, and the Kashi Vishwanath temple. So the temples and the tradition of spirituality and religious dominance of religious activities dominance. Now the whole governance should work around it. So you need to bring in remove a lot of inefficiencies, bring a lot of transparent actions. As much as you can get all the street vendors onto a vending platform, technological platform, so that physical presence in the physical space is only requirement to a certain extent, but a lot of things can happen online. That is also a way of modifying. You free up city spaces. You bring in. So here the premium is not on being physically present there, but providing the right service to the person who wants it at their doorstep, which becomes a very important thing. How do you enable them with technology? PM Swanidhi, which is happening, where digital transactions of street vendors have been encouraged to a great extent, and they have been supported financially through bank loans, which are small, but algorithm-based credential creating of these people. So I think it is very, very important to look at the online angle and what are the things happening there in order to create the credit history of a person and assess the person's worth to make him financially eligible for loans. This is another angle which should be looked at. Because unless in cities every person finds value, the city will not sustain everybody equally. at least for basic things. That is very, very important. And fourth thing, which I would say the most important thing in the city is, I talked about housing, I talked about transit, I talked about heritage conservation and looking at USPs of your city. Fourth thing is, rather the first thing should have been, is what does your city have in terms of water resources? What does city has in terms of air resources? Means, which are the green parts of your city? One simple example, there is a beautiful green stretch. That land is owned by X person. Okay? You cannot create a green tree forest overnight. You can create a building overnight. If this fellow is willing to retain, I mean, if he is going to trade that, okay, I am going to, this green patch will remain as it is. You reserve it as, can you give the FSI of that to him to be used elsewhere and sold elsewhere? And can you ask the realist that extra FSI should go into the most premium of spaces so that people will use it very effectively? Today, if you give FSI to build in, densest parts of the area, people will build it. But FSI should emanate from that green patch. So this fellow gets his money. He owns a land which happens to be a green patch. He gets his money. But at the same time, the forest doesn't get away from the city. I mean, that kind of innovation has to come in, where you are actually thinking of land and FSI and the way it plays around to create environmental sustainability, heritage conservation, conserving a lot of other activities which have happened there. There are huge mill lands, there are huge factory lands, there are huge PSU lands available. Now, how do you put them to use? See, one thing people can say is, green areas will retain karna hai. But if you retain the green area, unless you actually create economic nodes elsewhere around people or a transit node to connect to the economic node, the city is going to expand horizontally. And that is very unsustainable beyond a point. So every city has to stop somewhere and you should have a green area in between those cities. So now that is again a planning angle which has to be brought in. So there is some city dense population, then there is this green area which will sustain the ecosystem services for the city. Then you have another brownfield. So this is very, very important. And then I want to come to a important issue. This is macro. When you come to micro, why can't all the services of the city, except what has to be brought in form, can't be online and interlinked? You buy a vehicle, today, most of it is done. You don't need to. You get a fast tag there, you get an insurance there, you don't need to, and the service is also home driven. You go to the doorstep and it is given. Similarly, if that fellow is going to do all this, this service giving person can also electricity bill. There is somebody collecting electricity bill, there is somebody collecting a trade license fee, somebody a shop license fee, somebody health license fee. Why can't we combine all this? And it is relationship manager who manages this with a person whose interface, depending on the level. Some are mandatory payments, some are voluntary payments when you buy something or do something and acquire something. Can we have all of it as a person-based digital locker, which we exist, but person-based, and everything which is related to that person happens there? So that is again a way. I mean, today the mobile number becomes a unique ID and you can use that to create this thing. So I think again a lot of innovation is required in this space. So I think it is very important that these kind of innovative thoughts are brought in and cities are brought closer through technology, online platforms, rather than through this thing. And the economic activity which is polluting has to be relocated. Again, relocation can be done efficiently if the land, again, this person is able to liberalize his land for this thing and he can relocate. Definitely there is value. If there's an economic activity in 200 acres within the center of the city, if you relocate, that becomes a real estate value. But at the same time, that 200 acres, you have to get it at a cheaper price, and this relocation cost should be recovered from this. Again, everything cannot be relocated, then you mitigate it. So there could be mitigation strategies, there could be relocation strategies. Cities have to be looked in not at a level of 65 lakhs, 1 crore. It has to be looked in at the level of 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs and handled it in that level. It cannot be looked at in a few thousands also. It's very inefficient. You should look at it as, say 10,000 households in one place becoming. And there are some governance parlances which have to be brought about. Reuse of the water. Unless you use reused, treated water in construction water is not allowed. It has to be super clear and super enforced. Similarly, if you ask everybody to keep a garden, they may not. It is so easy to put in the bylaws, they may not. Can we aggregate? Can we bring it in the public parlance? Let them pay up money, you maintain it, and you create an employment for unskilled. So can that be looked into? I mean, cities are land of opportunities which have to be looked at that way. And innovations are the only way to go. Innovation, small improvements, large improvements, macro paradigm shift. Anything and everything is required to make cities sustainable. And cities have enough inefficiencies today in our cities are there, which can create employment if you remove those inefficiencies. Sometimes removing inefficiencies may save money. You don't need to spend. That itself is creating surplus for the poor or, lower middle class families or middle class families. I think it's very important to look at all this very, very carefully. And you can do it today because you have the technology to measure everything. Your education can be measured, your health can be measured, your income can be measured, your activities can be measured, your everything can be measured. Only thing is, I have a small house, but I can walk into a nice park when I need to sort of relax and breathe. And then, which is only 5 minutes away. And there's a small activity center where I can, if I want to put up a small thing, a startup or a economic activity, I do get it at an affordable price. And then whatever I do, and since I have clean water and clean air, I'm also healthy. So I don't spend my 800 or 900 or 1000 rupees per person per household on monthly on a health issue. Either because I'm not well, I lose my livelihood, or I spend on health care. So all these can make cities more livable and sustainable. And I think the other strategy simultaneously should be that how do you innovate in such a manner that even the areas next to the city, smaller towns, they become a beautiful living thing for the city. I mean, like for example, an IT-based infrastructure or services need not be placed within the city. It can be in an island which is very beautifully done and they can pay for it and they stay there. It could be away 50 kilometers from the city. It can be an island of existence. Today, what is happening is the affordable housing is going there. So the poor people and the middle class people who have to travel for work are going there. Can we get the high value people or high net worth activities there? So I think a lot of innovations are required in terms of how do we handle cities from now on. And nothing prevents us to have a beautiful blue stream in the center of the city. City means it's not just roads. You can have air and water also in the center of the city. And I know everybody is able to visualize the water body and air. If you don't have water and air proper, then there is no way you can sustain a city. I think these are the things, and a lot more innovations are possible and required. I could list out a few only. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Thara, for important updates on the work done by the ministry and the roadmap ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, now we'll stop for a short networking break. You can proceed to the networking lounge and can share your business card. You can search delegates by their name, designation, and organization. You can also network with attendees via chat and email. Also, there's an Expo Area where our partners have set up their booths. Explore the area for all the useful assets and PPTs shared by them.